night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the program. I'm your host, J.V. Johnson. Thank you for being here tonight. Does anybody else have this fingernail growth issue? Now, I have... people say I'm crazy. Some people do anyway. But I have this thing where if I drink beer, if I have a couple beers some night, my fingernails the next day actually grow like crazy. Does anybody else experience this, or is it just me? And I'm just before the show, I'm like, I just cut my nails. I just did, but they're out of control again. I don't think I'm making it up. I think there's really something to this. We have to have somebody on who knows what I'm talking about and can explain the science behind it. And I mean, I know that fingernails and hair are made of, a protein. And I believe that protein is found in things like beer. So I think there's truth to this. Anyway, well, this is not a grooming show. Welcome to the show. This is actually our Wednesday night program, which I'm excited about because we do History Behind the Haunt on Wednesday nights now. And we've done a few places already. We've done, let's see, with the Cambry House in Nauvoo, Illinois. We've done Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany, New York. Those are both great programs. And tonight we're going to visit the Ashmore Estates. This is another location that has seen some attention from the paranormal reality television shows. Plus, they do a lot of really cool events out there. And again, it falls into this category of government buildings that were used for nearly a century and then basically abandoned. Just like the Rolling Hills Asylum was. It was a county poorhouse, an almshouse, designed for the indigent who couldn't take care of themselves. Back in the 19th century into the early 20th century, they didn't have programs that would just pay people to do whatever. They would, if you couldn't support yourself, you would basically throw your life to the mercy of the local government, which would be the county, and the county would put you in one of these facilities where they would feed you and house you until something better could be figured out. And those county almshouses were all across the country, and most of them are pretty impressive structures. I mean, if you know anything about 19th century construction in America, particularly when it comes to public buildings like that, they built them to last a very, very long time, usually made of brick or stone. Very, very well crafted. In fact, you'd go into some of these buildings and they're just gorgeous. At least you can see that they used to be gorgeous. Amazing woodwork and beautiful, staircases and wide open hallways, and a lot of times, marble and stone. Pretty amazing stuff. It's not the type of thing we see built today, for sure. And we've lost a lot of these buildings. And that's one of the intentions of this particular segment, and this particular feature on Beyond Reality, is that start drawing attention to some of these places before we lose them. If you're listening to this show as a podcast, thank you for doing that. Please share the link with your friends. We want to see our podcast subscribers, those numbers grow, and more people join us on the podcast portion of the show. But at the same time, I'd like you to join us on YouTube. Find the YouTube channel, because in addition to having just a wealth of back episodes on YouTube, there's about 500 there. There's some special content. Plus, we have a live chat room when the show streams live there at 11 o'clock Eastern, Monday through Thursday, sometimes Friday. So tonight we're going to be talking to Robbin Terry, owner of the Ashmore Estates, and it's our Wednesday night edition of History Behind the Haunt, right here on Beyond Reality. Don't go away. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Robbin, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm excited about this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate asking me to come back.
So if you met somebody who had no idea what you were talking about when you mentioned Ashmore Estates, how would you describe it to them? What would you say it is?
Usually what I tell people is basically just what it is. It's that place that your grandparents used to always tell you that if you don't stop it, you're going to send me to that poor farm, and that's what it really is a poor farm.
Yeah, those are phrases that used to be used quite often. You're going to drive me to the poorhouse or the poor farm, and we don't have those anymore. So a lot of people aren't even aware of what we're talking about when we use those terms. But they were real facilities that the government created to accommodate indigents, right?
Right. Every county had to have one. It was all before the Public Aid Act, and so you had to have this because there was no money for people governmental-wise, and they had to have someplace to go. So the easiest way was having having these facilities that they would send people to that didn't have the means to take care of themselves, or maybe they were borderline really not needing to go to jail, but they may have need to go someplace to be taken care of, and so they'd send them to the almshouses or the poor farms or whatever they called them at that point.
And these would be locations that would take people that, A, didn't have enough money to support themselves, or B, maybe had some mental illness, or C, maybe they were somehow disabled and couldn't take care of themselves. I mean, they would throw anyone and anything that really couldn't survive on its own into these facilities, and it was just kind of a big mess of people.
Right. Yep. That's exactly what they did. You'd have anything in these places from a 4-year-old child to a 70-year-old rapist. I mean, you could have anybody in there, this facility, because these were basically people that the government and the local jurisdictions really didn't want to mess with. And, it's almost like they were the has-nots. They didn't have anything. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any way to get around. They didn't have anything to do with their life, and so they just sent them out here because they didn't want to deal with them. So send them out there.
And I think you mentioned it, but it was required that counties have these types of facilities throughout the country as a way to offer some type of assistance or to some way take care of people that couldn't take care of themselves. This isn't an isolated place. This was all over the country.
Right. It wasn't just like, Ashmore's out in the middle of nowhere, but that was every facility because the people that had the money that in town, they didn't want to look at the low life, so to speak, the dredge of the life, out there. They didn't want to look at that. So they built these facilities basically out in the middle of, a no man's land, where they wouldn't have to look at them. They wouldn't have to deal with it. They could just put them out there and let them do their thing and sit on the grounds and not get in the way of anybody. So it was kind of a sad situation, really, because they just put them out there, so basically put them out to pasture, so to speak, and just let them sit out there.
Yeah, almost literally. And in a lot of cases, and I think it's true of Ashmore Estates, they had a farm that they would have people who could work, I suppose maybe to provide some of the food that they would eat themselves, but I don't know if they ever took any of that stuff to market, but they actually had an operating farm.
Right, yeah, Ashmore did. It was, the Coles County Poor Farm is what it started off with. Ashmore Estates came later down the road, but the Coles County Poor Farm was the name of it originally. And, it started out back in 1857, right around that time frame. And they did have a working farm of about, close to 300 acres that they had livestock and cattle and farm, they farmed their own their corn, beans and stuff like that out there. They had whole gardens, hogs. They had at one time about 25 different buildings on the property that they used for the farm. It was a large working farm, and they did actually sell some of that stuff, but it was also maintained to use for their own, to keep the people there that lived in the location for their own usage to support themselves.
Where is this located? We've mentioned the name a few times, but where exactly are we talking about?
Ashmore Estates it's basically about 1 mile to the west of Ashmore, Illinois, and 7 miles to the east of Charleston, Illinois. It's just off of Route 16, a small highway that goes through Illinois. And it's kind of, people are familiar with Terre Haute, Indiana a lot of times, or Indianapolis. It's 2 hours to the west of Indianapolis, or about 45 minutes kind of northwest of Terre Haute. But it's one of those locations that if you don't know it's there, you won't see it because it just sits back up off the highway. And at the time when it was actually a working facility, there was so many trees in front of it, they were basically hiding it with the trees.
So I guess by the description and by the towns that you referenced, I'm assuming it's a rather rural area.
Yeah, Ashmore, Illinois is only probably 500-700 people. And now Charleston's a little bigger because Eastern Illinois University is there, but even then, it's 20,000, 25,000 people, so it's not a real big community. And that's the closest town that's really close to Ashmore Estates, and that's 7 miles away.
Robbin, what's the history of the area prior to the American expansion? Is there a history of Native American activity or anything?
There has been some. We've actually had people that came out and wanted to try to do some investigating as far as the Indians in the area, and we haven't really came up with anything. But we do know that they were out in that area. Lincoln was involved in Charleston. He was out in that area some as well. So we know that there was a lot of people in the area that are well known, and I think that the Indians did. There was a railroad that ran really close to the building as well, right down along Route 16 originally. And but we haven't really got into a lot of the deep history as far as the going back like pre-Poor Farm era.
You mentioned some dates. I think you said 1857. Was that the year that the original building was constructed?
The building originally was around that time frame where they had another property that they maintained, and then they brought this one into Ashmore, outside of Ashmore, and then they built the property there. It was built like 1879 or so on the grounds where it's at now. And they actually had a small fire there when a young child was getting ready for breakfast one morning, and her dress caught fire, and she perished in the from her burns and everything from the fire. But the building didn't. It remained. It stayed there. But then they actually came in and tore it down about 1915, and then finished this one off in 1916.
Okay, so the original building, was that a brick construction or was that a wooden frame building?
No, it was a wooden frame building, the original one. It was a pretty good sized location building. It was 2 stories, but it wasn't the best kept. And like I said, nobody paid attention to it because they didn't want to go out there. But it was when it had that fire. The fire was at one point when Elvis Skinner died from the fire burns. And then 30 years later, they decided that, gee, there's a lot of damage done to this building from that fire. Maybe we should do something different to it. And the thing that I always thought was really interesting with that, and most people don't say anything about this today, but you have to go back 100 years, is there's a woman that was assigned from the state that came down and basically told the county, you need to tear this place down and build a new one because this is terrible. The infestation with rats and mice and vermin. There was people laying in their own feces. Ugh. She actually said that the barns were in better condition for the animals than where the people were living.
Wow.
But I always thought it was interesting that this woman had enough power with the state 100 years ago to get this taken care of. Today, you don't think about that, but 100 years ago, that didn't happen.
That's right. That's very true. Can you give us a basic description of what life was like if you were, quote unquote, an inmate?
I think, they would have got up early in the morning, worked around the farm, and then basically came back and did their breakfast and their lunch, dinner, and things like that there. Pretty much went to bed and started all over the next day. They also used the facility for a rehab situation. And the only article I've really been able to find that talked about anything in the inside of the building, because remember, nobody wanted anything to do with these people, so there wasn't like the reporters were running out there, and doing news articles and stuff like that. So, but there was one gentleman that, and I forget his name, but he played minor league baseball, and he messed up his leg and needed to go to rehab. And back then, they didn't have money for rehab back in the early 1900s and things like that. So they sent him out to the Poor Farm. He stayed out there for a while he was rehabbing. And he mentions in the article that the facility was kept really nice. They kept it clean. They had nice meals every day. And he's really talked up really about the place. He said it felt like you were living at home. And he said it wasn't like it was some boot camp or something like that, where they'd send people out and make them work their butts off out there. But he did say that they got up, they had to do the chores, they had to do things like that. But it was a family. It was the people that lived out there felt that they were part of a family, and that they enjoyed, each other. And that was their group of people. That was their friends. Was the only people that lived out there. That
was their community. So the story you just told us about, what was the time frame of that?
He was out there, I want to say, around, I think it was like 1920s, some time frame in there, 1920s, 1930s.
So you kind of referenced it here, and I'm not sure which of these visits, because there were a couple visits by state commissioners, I guess. And one in 1902, they had a description of the facility that was not very complimentary.
Right.
What did they see?
They would have came out there, they would have basically seen rats and mice running all through the place. It would have been people basically had maybe the rooms were set up for maybe 2 to 3 people at that time. I haven't seen the inside. Like I said, there's no pictures really of any of these locations on the interior at all. But I'm just envisioning that they would have had rooms set up where for 2 people, and they probably had 6 staying in some of those at one time. and they weren't taking care of it. It was just in bad, deplorable condition, and it's just something that you wouldn't even think anybody would want to live in, but they didn't have any choice. That was the only place they had.
Right. And then again in 1911, it was visited again. And at that point, I believe it was determined, as you referenced, that it needed to be torn down and something else needed to be built.
Right. That's pretty much around the same time frame that the lady came out there and pretty much told them, you got to tear this down and rebuild it. And because it had a lot of fire damage done to it. I mean, it wasn't where the structural from the fire that happened 30 years prior was going to cause the place to fall down, but they never repaired any of the damage. And it was just in such bad shape, and the county didn't do anything with it. Keep in mind, this wasn't the people that lived there's responsibility to make sure this building stayed in good shape. I mean, they probably kept it as clean as they could and all, but this was a county-owned facility. The county was the one that was responsible for this location and making sure it was done the way it was supposed to be done.
And then the new building, the construction started in 1916, I believe, and that was the building that we see today, or part of the complex that we see today, the brick structure that is what we now call Ashmore Estates.
Right. Well, it was still Coles County Poor Farm at the time when they built it in 1916, but it was an all brick building. When they did it, because of the fire damage and all, they decided, let's build this thing basically fire resistive. So when they built it, the only thing that was wood in the building would have been the window frames and then the roof structure itself.
Wow. I mean, I've always fascinated at these structures, and, Ashmore Estates is one of them. I think of Penhurst Asylum, Rolling Hills Estate. These are all facilities that were built about the same time, the early part of the 20th century, and they were built to last. These structures were built solid, and one of the problems with that kind of construction is it's almost impossible to maintain in this day and age, right? I mean, you probably know that firsthand.
Yeah, when it was built, I always kind of walk through and just marvel at it, because looking at how it was done and how it was built, and just thinking that they don't have like the concrete machines where it's concrete pump trucks and all like
right.
that they can pump concrete. These guys were there was wheelbarrows or carrying it up in buckets and whatever they had to do to get and it's all poured concrete floors and throughout the entire building, and it's amazing how much work they had to do to it to get it where it's at. If this would have been a wooden structure like they would have built prior to it back in 1916, I'm sure it would have probably been torn down by now just because it wouldn't have lasted. But they were actually smart enough to do the concrete and block and clay tile that they used to build the building, and I think that's the only thing that's kept it alive.
Give us the uses of the facility from the point it was built in 1916, that solid structure, to date, because it went through a couple of different uses, didn't it?
Right. It was when they closed down the Poor Farm about 1959. That's when public aid basically, and I always tell people, it's like, instead of coming out and working for your money, we're just going to write you a check. And so that's what the government did. And I think some of that might have just been, it was easier to do that, to maintain poor farms and things like that. Plus, as the population grew, they probably didn't have enough facilities to put people like this. So at about 1959, it shut down from being the Poor Farm. And then it was sold, and it was going to become a care facility, basically for the mentally insane. And it was never. A lot of people want to say that it was an asylum. It was never an asylum. The biggest difference between the asylums and the mental hospitals is the asylums basically are not there to try to help you. They're just basically almost like propping you up in a corner and letting you live out your life there. Where the hospital, like what Ashmore Estates was, they tried to take care of people and try to help them and make them better mentally as they could. So it went through for a while there. It became a mental facility that they worked with, and it changed hands so many times throughout there, just because they were trying to come in and try to make it work as a private psychiatric hospital. That didn't work after about 5 or 6 years. So then they opened it back up, and they turned around to try to make it a public care facility, and they were still having problems with that. And then some other people bought it in '76 and pretty much tried to do the same thing. And when Paul Swinford bought it, and he turned it into a public hospital for the to help the mentally insane as well. And he was running into financial problems with that and red tape and everything. And he actually had it for a while. Then it and closed it down not too much longer after he had it opened up. It was opened up like in the late 70s and closed down around the middle 80s. So it wasn't open very long like that at all.
So it closed down in the mid-'80s, and did it become vacant at that point and not used for a while?
Yeah, it sat empty for, I think it was like 10 or 12 years. And then another gentleman decided to buy it. He was going to build a house in there. And he had all these, these grandiose ideas that I'm going to build a house, we're going to live there. But the problem was that it sat empty for so long, the vandalism was getting so extensive, and kids were breaking into it, and adults were breaking into it just for, trying to get in so they could kind of maybe experience something inside this old haunted building as that they'd heard. And he just couldn't keep up with the vandalism problem. So he basically said, I can't do it, and sold it to get out of it himself.
Have you entered the picture yet, or are you still some buyers in between?
Nope, I'm still a couple buyers out.
So what happens next?
When he sold it, it sat empty for a while, and then he sold it, I guess it sat empty for about 10 years, close to it, 8 to 10 years. He sold it to a gentleman by the name of Scott Kelly, who bought it, and Scott decided just to turn it into a haunted house facility. Basically, the typical haunted houses we all, for amusement park purposes only. And so that's what he was doing with it. And he went in and built walls inside and did different things there. He operated for about 10 years. That he operated as a haunted house, and that's what they were doing. They were just doing that. Basically, it was an October only type thing. He lived out there in a mobile home on the property, but that's what they did with it at that point, was just a haunted house for himself.
Almost seems appropriate in retrospect. So, these buildings like this go through all these different transformations. What do you think is happening? And we're going to get into this a little more detail as the discussion continues. But as these different uses come to play, what do you think is happening to the memory of the residents that have, in many cases, spent much of their lives and in some cases died there? Do you think it's changing that spiritual connection at all as these changes happen?
I think when it changed from being a poor farm to a hospital, and then basically trying to be a residence, and I think once it went to this haunted house thing, I think at that point it was pretty much like, we're giving up on anybody that used to live here. We're just going to make this a haunted house attraction and raise money from that, and that's what we're going to do. So I think that did change things with basically the era and the aura of the building itself. I think that was an issue that really was out there and was causing some problems for things.
Are you local to that area? Is that where you're from?
No, actually, I live 2 hours away from Ashmore Estates.
You do now, or you always have?
Oh, I always have.
Okay, so when did you first become aware of this place?
I was out there, I think it was September of 2012. I think it was September 2012. I had a friend that contacted me that he was doing a public investigation out there, and asked me if I would come out and assist him with it, because he was having so many people, and they were doing like a 12-hour investigation, so he wanted to know if I would take like the back half of it to help him out with it. So I went out there to do it, and it was kind of one of those things where you walk in to investigate, but there's so much stuff in that building that you couldn't even investigate. And I told him, I said, I'm just going to go sit in the car. Let me know when you need me. And because you couldn't even find anybody. You didn't have any idea where they went, because they'd wander through the building, and there were so many little rooms and partitions and stuff like that. It was impossible to try to maintain and make do a proper investigation with people to help them out.
Obviously, if you were asked to do that, you had some already experience in the paranormal. When did that start for you? When did you take an interest in paranormal topics to begin with? It's probably a little bit over 10 years ago now. I'm a little bit different. I live in an old movie theater, and and I had some people that came over and wanted to know if they could investigate it sometime. I'm like, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I said, I've noticed a few things going on in here anyway. And so they investigated the theater, and they came up with some stuff and came back and showed me. And so I kind of got involved with them because I thought it was pretty cool that what I had experienced in the past, they were actually finding some things here as well. And so kind of jumped in with both feet with them and started doing stuff with them, and been involved with it ever since. You live in an old theater now. Did you remodel it, or is it still set up like a theater?
Nope. It was when I bought it. It was actually set empty for 3.5 years, and nobody had any use for the building. I'm in a small town. They had the slope floor, so we bought it. Basically, I could put my office in the front. Is what the idea was, and I stored some cars and did some things in the back with it. And then a few years later, I told my wife, I said, we're here so much, I just live here. And so we built a 2-story house inside the movie theater, and been living here now for 20 years or so.
That's really cool. And, that's another thing. And I kind of opened up the program talking about some of these treasures that we've lost over time. And when I say treasures, I mean buildings. And one of the things we've lost a lot of are these small town theaters, these old theaters. They're just disappearing, and they're being converted and or demolished or whatever it happens to be. I live in Cooperstown, New York, and there was a theater here that I think closed in the mid-'80s, maybe early 90s, and that was converted into like a little craft mall or something like that. But all the theater guts are gone. But those are real community treasures, and it's a shame to see them disappear.
Yeah, you're right. They have been too. I go to a lot of small towns. If I'm in there and they've got a theater, I usually stop in and talk to them a little bit and tell them, hey, I own a theater myself. It's kind of cool to see you guys doing this and what they've done. So it's pretty interesting to see in these small towns that some of the theaters some of them are still up, but a lot of them, like I said, are torn down. And it's all because they've gone to the digital age, and everything wants to be, they've got the recliners in the theaters and things like that now. So nobody wants to go to just a simple theater anymore and do that. But we do stuff here with some groups that come in. When I built the house, we decided to build a small theater room, so we've got a 31-chair theater room that we built inside the house. And so we'll have some people over, or we'll have a group come in and do like some fundraising for them and help them out, or just show some, October we may show some horror movies and just have tickets where we have 31 people can show up and stuff like that.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, so you had an interest in the paranormal. You actually went and helped out on an investigation at Ashmore Estates. There's some space between that and now, and that space includes you deciding you're going to buy this property. Tell us how that happened.
Well, actually, when Scott Kelly sold the building at auction, I think it was like in January, February, someplace in that time frame of 2013, and he sold it at auction and decided to get out of it. The roof had blown off, and he's just like, he was done with it. He wanted to get out of it, and the roof blew off in January of 2013, and then I guess it was May of 2014 or so. I'm sorry, no, it was, I get my dates mixed up. October, he sold the building and at auction, and the guy that bought it contacted me because I had a haunted house here in the basement that we did as a fundraiser to help our local emergency squad, and he contacted me about wanting to buy some props. So this guy came over, and I didn't really know who he was at all, but he kind of came over and picked out all these props he wanted. So we were talking, and I said something about living here. And he said, well, that's kind of cool. He's like, I didn't realize that you lived here in the building. I said, yeah, been doing it for a few years now. So he asked if there's any chance he could kind of take a tour of the building. So I said, yeah, we can do that. So we wandered through, and we're standing upstairs. And I said, so are you building a new haunted house or putting one in or what? And he said, well, I had one in Illinois. I'm going to build one in Indiana. And he's saying, I'm going to sell the one in Illinois. And I said, where is it? And he said, Ashmore Estates. And I'm like, really? You own Ashmore Estates? He said, yeah. And my wife's like, oh, crap, because I talked about it in the past. I thought it was a cool location, and I knew the other owner real well since he had a haunted house, and we had one here in the theater, so we talked quite a bit. And so I just told him, I said, I'd love to come over and take a look at the building sometime. So I went over and went over on a Sunday and wandered through the building, and it was one of those times where most people would have probably opened the front door and said, I've seen enough, turned around and walked away. But after owning the theater, and this place was a mess itself, and I thought, I started looking at everything. I'm like, this is all cosmetic stuff. This is a dumpster. You just throw it out a window, get rid of it. And I'm looking at the structure itself, looking to see if there's problems. And I'm like, it's just a bunch of junk in here. That's all I see. I really don't see any other problems. So I'm walking through, and then actually when I got on the second floor, I'm walking down the second floor in the hallway, and it was fairly clear as I walked down the hallway. And I'm about as sensitive as a rock, but there was something there that said, buy our building and help us. And it wasn't like that they wanted help the people that were still there, the spirits that were there, didn't want help for themselves. They wanted help for their building. And I have a friend of mine who's a psychic medium, and he said, you know what it was? He said it was probably people from the theater, since the spirits that are here at the theater, said they travel with you all the time. They're always with you. He said they probably were with you over there when you looked at Ashmore, and we're telling the other ones, you should see what he's done in our place. And so I think it was kind of something along that line that so we walked out, and I we're on the way home because I got a 2-hour drive home, and my wife said, just buy it. I'm like, what? She's like, you're not going to, just buy it.
You've described several experiences that I've had. I'm the same way. I've got a certain romantic element for these older buildings, and I walk in, and anybody else would turn around and run away, say no way. I've done the opposite. I've bought some of these old buildings and tried to restore and make a difference, because there's a certain calling. And I don't know what exactly it is, whether it's a spiritual calling or it's something that's innate in people like you or me, where you just it almost breaks your heart to see them just fade to time.
Yeah, and then you see people that get a hold of them that do things with them that.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with the haunted house idea that they were doing, but at the same time, I mean, that's what they're doing with it. That's fine, but at least go back and try to do something with the building itself. And nothing had been done with that building since basically the day the hospital closed it. Mm-hmm. And it just deteriorated. The windows were a mess. They were all rotted out, the whole shot. I mean, there was birds like a thoroughfare in there flying in and out of the place all the time because there was no way to stop them. There was no screens, no windows, no plastic, anything over it. And it was just sad condition. But they hadn't put any money into it. So, that's when I bought it. I said, we got to fix all this. And, fortunately, I had a lot of help from the paranormal community that came out, especially the first 6 months I owned it, and just pitched in and helped me do stuff out there. So it made a big difference.
What did you do first? What was the first order of business once you bought it to get it on the path to recovery?
About the first thing I remember doing is I opened up a window in the back that was boarded up from the inside. I ripped all the plywood off because it was middle of the day and you couldn't see anything in there because some of the windows were covered with wood, some of them weren't, and so it was nice to see a little light. So I opened up the window and I did that. It's like 8 bats fell on top of me.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it was like welcome to Ashmore, and so we got rid of them out of the building, but then we started just basically cleaning it, gutting it. In fact, the guys that came over to help me that weekend. We just started on the second floor because we were on the second floor, and we threw out enough lumber to burn to get rid of it, hanging out of the building, that it came up to the second floor window by the time we were done that weekend.
Oh, wow.
Burned it all out of there. But we brought in 5 dumpsters and filled up 5 dumpsters, and I had people come over and said, do you want to save this? I said, look, if you wouldn't put it in your living room, I don't want it. And so we're just starting throwing stuff into dumpsters, out the windows, into the dumpsters, and we'd fill one dumpster, and I'd call the company and have them drop another one off, and we just did that until we filled like 5 dumpsters, and these were like dumpsters you could park cars in and get rid of it all. So we cleaned all the junk out, and then at that point we started working on the roof because there was no roof on the building when I bought it because it all blew off, and the people that owned it after it blew off never bothered to try to fix it. So there's always water. It was the only thing I say that there was the attic floor was concrete. Mm-hmm. So that really helped a lot because not all the water was coming in every time it rained, but you were still getting a significant amount that came in. And so we put a roof on that, got that done, and then we replaced all the windows in the building and put windows in. So I was pretty happy because I was hoping to get the roof on by September. I bought it in May of 2014, and I was hoping to get the roof on it by September. We had the roof on it by June, and I was hoping to get some of the windows done that year, or at least boarded up, and we had all the windows in the building by October.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I was figuring I had to do everything myself, but I had so much help that we just got things done quick. And I think there was 83 openings we had to put in windows or board up or whatever we were going to do. But yeah, there was 83 openings I had to fix.
Wow. When you purchased it, you must have had a vision for it. What was your vision?
Being involved with the paranormal, my whole idea was basically make it almost like a paranormal palace, where people could come out and investigate and enjoy themselves and have a good time with it, but then make it convenient for them as well. And when I bought it, there was no electricity in the building. There was no water in the building. There was no windows. So we fixed the windows. We got the electricity in there. The following year, I managed to get bathrooms. We put bathrooms in the building, and then we actually put one outside, too, because we've got some areas outside where people stay. And, that was the whole thing. It was like trying to make this better than it was, because it was... People come out and investigate, and they get out there, and the guy that owns it would tell them, well, the closest bathroom is 7 miles to Walmart.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, I can't do that. That's just not right. That's not the way you do things. So we ended up doing this, and, we put a ton of money into the place, and we've taken now, just for the paranormal side of things, there's the biggest thing that most people hate doing when they're setting up paranormal equipment is setting up their infrared cameras and having to run wires up 3 floors and things like that. So we pre-ran all the wires, and so they're already there. So basically somebody just takes their cameras up there and puts them on the floor, plugs them in down below, and they're done.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a nice feature. As you were doing all this work, did you start to experience anything paranormal?
I did myself. Yeah, I was out there one time just by myself, and it was in May of 2014, and I was on the 3rd floor, and I was up there hooking up some electrical, and something just kind of came across me that it's like, you need to leave. And and I don't think it was anything demonic, as some people like to sit there and tell the demonic stories about Ashmore Estates on TV, but it was nothing demonic. But there was something that was kind of trying to push me out the door and make me want me to leave. And after about an hour of fighting this feeling, I said, all right, fine. If you guys are having a party and I'm not invited, I'll leave. Because I don't think it was anything malicious. I think it was just something almost like protective. And it could have been basically...
Like protective of you, like trying to protect you? Okay.
Yeah, because I'd been there for a couple weeks already, and it just happened. And I thought maybe it was like, I do a lot of wiring, so I'm not, I'm real familiar with hooking up electrical. And, I'd done the theater and then the entire Ashmore. I've done all kinds of electrical, so that's not a big deal. But maybe there was something there that I thought I was going to do something wrong, and that they wanted me to walk away from it. So I decided just to go ahead and take off for the afternoon and left, and just walk away from the building that day.
How many people were housed in the building at any point during its history where you'd consider it to have been the max occupancy?
Well, we had a lady that actually lived out there when it was a poor farm. Her parents were the caretakers of the location, and she would tell me that there was, it varied a lot. So, the numbers were up and down. She said it was anything from 20 to 30 people at a time would probably live out there.
Do any of the records exist? I know that in a lot of these cases, very poor record keeping was done, and in many cases, the records that did exist are gone.
The only thing, we have found we didn't find anything on the property, but I've gone through and had found some documentation and some old newspaper articles and things like that of like people that had died there. And I thought it was kind of interesting in a way, because you would have just thought that most of these people that had been just from the area that lived there, but there was people from like 6 or 7 different countries, that came there and came to the United States and didn't have anything when they got here, and they ended up out there at the poor farm. So it was kind of interesting with all these different people that came in there.
What are some of the stories that visitors have shared with you of their experiences?
Of course, we have the typical people that come out and see the shadows and the things like that. But we've and I push this a lot, and I try to talk people. Unfortunately, I just had somebody call me a while ago that wanted to do this, but I always tell people to investigate out there during the day. And most of them don't, because they watch too much TV and they see everything at night. And I said, look at these facilities and think about when they were active. I said, this would have been a facility that would have probably been active from 6 in the morning to like 9 o'clock at night. And I said, so after 9 o'clock, everybody here was probably in bed. And I said, so it's and that's what's happened. A lot of people come out there during the day and have experienced a lot of things. I've had people that have seen a white figure walk down the hallways. We get a lot of people have told me they felt like a small hand grab their hand when they walked down a hall. And we had a lady that actually a few weeks ago, or actually last month or a couple months ago when I was out there with her, they were sitting in the men's dining hall area, and she told me she's a medium, and she said, I see a guy standing right across here in the hallway, from us, right across the room here from us. I'm like, okay. She said, let me describe him to you. I said, no, wait, don't do that. Let me write down what I think you might see, and then we can compare notes. And she's like, okay. So I wrote down everything on my phone, and they were filming me writing it all down. And I said, all right, go ahead and tell me what you think you see. And she said it, and the guy was shooting the camera. He's like, man, I'm getting shivers right now because everything you're saying, he wrote down.
Wow.
And I like doing it like that because anybody can agree with somebody. It's like,
right.
Yep, we got people see it all the time. But when I give them my side first, and kind of like hide it from them, so to speak, when I write it down and then flip it over after they've said whatever they've said, it's like, and they match, then it's kind of cool because that you can justify that.
Yeah, that's a level of verification that goes a long way. You've mentioned a few apparitions and things that people have seen. Do you have any names or personalities associated with any of those appearances that you have found through any kind of research or even maybe through EVP work or anything?
We think the little girl that everybody that experiences this young hand in their hand. We think that might be Elva Skinner, who died from the results of the burns from the fire on the original structure. And the other reason I think that might be her is because there was a girl that lived down the street from Ashmore, probably about 3 or 4 blocks, so to speak, a quarter of a mile down from Ashmore, living in a farmhouse. And her mom would call me every once in a while and said, my daughter's been up late night in her bedroom singing. And I go in and I think, what are you doing? She's like, I'm singing with my friend from Ashmore. And she's like, really? She said, yeah. She's like, I don't see anybody there, but she's got this friend that comes to visit. I'm like, okay. And I said, not to scare you. I said, but the next time she's over and she says your daughter says she's there, can you see if your daughter can describe her? And she described her as somebody that she said she's a little younger than she is, which Elva would she almost turned 5. She was just short of her 5th birthday. And this girl was 7 at the time. She's like, she's younger than I am. And she has something like wrapped around her legs. Well, I'm thinking those were probably the bandages from the fire.
Yeah.
And then she described her as she had blonde hair, and her hair was in hair ribbons, which is kind of interesting because girls don't wear hair ribbons now. And in fact, her mom, she said that her daughter wanted hair ribbons to wear to school. She's like, I had to make them because you can't go out and buy hair ribbons, like the little ribbons and all that they used to put in girls' hair. She's like, you can't buy those now. So she had to go out and make them because her daughter wanted to be just like this girl. And so I always thought that was really interesting when we have a 7-year-old girl that tells us so much about this young girl that comes down and visits her. And they were actually doing the teacher at school said that they had to practice doing their stop, drop, and roll like they do in fires. And she's like, I practice that at home with my friend all the time. She said because she got hurt, with fire. And she won't let her mom burn candles in the house because she said those are bad, they can hurt you. And so there's so many little factors that led up to that. It's like we pretty much think that she's there, still in the building today.
Wow. How far down away from Ashmore Estates did you say this girl lived?
Probably 3 to 4 blocks, quarter of a mile.
So you said the original property was 300 acres. Was that site originally part of the original farm?
Yep. In fact, actually, there was a barn there that was part of the original structure that just was torn down a couple years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, she would have floated down there probably just on her own during the barn or the farm days and things like that. So it wouldn't have been unusual for her to be wandering around down that way.
It's always fascinating when you can make a connection between something that has been experienced paranormally and somebody who actually lived or has a story to tell. That really adds some satisfaction to the whole thing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, the lady that lived out there that we talked to just actually last year that she came out there for a while with us. She didn't have anything as far as the paranormal side of things. She didn't want anything to do with that. She didn't believe any of it at all, which was, I told her, I said, she didn't want to come out. And I said, that's fine. I said, I want you to come out and talk about the history of the place. I said, because that's what's really cool to me. That's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to buy it, because I think it's just a historical, cool place.
Right.
So we had a picture with a bunch of buildings that we never really knew what they were. And she was like, this is what this building is, this is what this one was, because she lived out there. I mean, that's what, she lived out there with her mom and dad. And she said the structure as we know it as Ashmore Estates right now, during the summer, her family would move to the house that was on the same property because there was air conditioning in that house, but there wasn't in the building. So they would go over there and stay because it was cooler that way. But all the other inmates had to stay inside the building itself.
A lot of these county poorhouses, poor farms, almshouses, whatever you want to call them, had obviously deaths on the property, and they would inter them in basically paupers' cemetery. Are there cemeteries on the property?
We don't know of any on the property that's been listed. Actually, we just contacted by a cemetery board from the county a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they wanted permission to come out there and look because they think there might have been one. I do know that there's some people that think there is one on the corner, probably like the northwest corner of the property. But this lady also told me that she used to see somebody, she was probably 7 or 8 years old when she lived out there. She said she used to see somebody late night, a lot of times out there in the middle of the field digging. And she had no idea why he was out there digging, but she said today she thinks that it may have been that he was burying someone out there in the field that passed away. Now, there is a cemetery, the Coles County Poor Farm Cemetery, is about a mile straight across from the building itself, out in the middle of a farm field that's covered with trees and everything, and they won't really let you go to it, but we do know it's out there. We've got pictures of some of the stones and everything that were out there.
It's not maintained, and it's off limits. Is that what you're saying?
Right, yeah, it's not maintained at all, and the farmer bought the ground, and I don't think he realized that cemetery was there when he bought the ground. And it's just overgrown, and I'm going to stop down and talk to him sometimes. I'd like to get down there and see if we can't clean it up a little bit if he'll let us, but I was just told that he just doesn't want anybody out there on the property.
Yeah. Well, those cemeteries for any of these almshouses, do we know, did they mark graves, or was it, I mean, I know a pauper's grave isn't anything that's may have been marked, but do we know what they used to do?
Yeah, they actually... The ones that are out there in this particular cemetery, they're all marked. They've got the names, they've got the years, some of the months and days, things like that are all out there. And yeah, they've got these all marked, which is kind of interesting because they did actually maintain the dates and everything on those.
So as you've learned more about the property and you've put more time, energy, and of course money into it, what do you hope at the end of the day that people will walk away with if they visit?
When they come out, I hope that they just realize some of the history of the location, and they think about that, and they go back and realize what people were like, what it was like back in 105 years ago to live there at that location, and what they had to endure every day, as well as some of the people when it transformed over to a hospital. They were almost like experimental cases out there because they did electroshock therapy treatments and everything out there during the hospital days. So I hope they walk away with a little more of history, of the knowledge of the place, as well as a good day and had just an enjoyable day visiting the location, even taking the paranormal side of things out of it completely. Just as long as they walk back and think, we enjoyed it. We had a good time coming out to this location.
Do you think it's important to do this to help honor the memory of the people that lived there over the years and some who actually died there?
I think so. I think that's one thing that we've tried to do. In fact, on the third floor of the building, I've got some posters up there that I've got a list of some of the people that died there at the location. There's about 200 people that have passed away there, mostly from natural causes. But I call that my memorial floor because we've done that. We also invite people that have loved ones or somebody in the paranormal community or something like that passed away, to bring a photo in, and we'll all hang it up on the wall. There's no charging like that. We just put it up on the wall for them, just in memory of the people that live there or that they've known that passed away.
We're talking with Robbin Terry, owner of Ashmore Estates. I've got to change the subject just a little bit here because I'm really, really curious. This might be the most important question of the night. Do you really own the original Mystery Machine?
Yep. Yeah, that's the one that was owned by Hanna-Barbera Studios back in 1969 when they started the cartoon series.
And, of course, we're talking about Scooby-Doo. That must be a real treat to take around and let people see.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. A lot of people don't realize what it is until they start, maybe reading some of the banners we've got sitting out or something like that, or I tell them about it because they just think it's just another painted van. But it was owned by the studio, and it's kind of weird because there's a lot of vans that look really nice that people have done, But this one was actually painted because in the basically in the back shop area of the building, they went back and painted it there at the studio, Hanna-Barbera Studios, and then just took it around to different events and doing stuff like that. It was actually wrecked out in Hollywood, California area, and they took it into a shop called Barris Customs. And George Barris did cars like Ecto-1s, the Beverly Hillbillies, Batmobile. He did all those iconic cars back in the 60s. And so he had the van in his shop, which I thought was just kind of cool itself, just to have that in there. And he's got some little plaques that he put on there, and he's got a dash plaque that he signed to put on the dash plaque of the van. So, but yeah, it's a blast to take it around. We do a lot of stuff to help raise money for charities, including like Lost Limbs Foundation helps amputee children. So we take it out and do things like that with them all the time.
That's cool. I mean, obviously, Scooby-Doo was a cartoon, so they didn't use the van in the actual cartoon, but you're saying they used it for promotional purposes?
Right. They would take it to different conventions or events like that, and they'd have like maybe a cast of Scooby-Doo characters with them, and just to promote the cartoon. So that's what they did with it. And
do you have a story about John Wayne Gacy?
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, yeah, that's at the theater. We kind of had a connection with him by mistake one time when we were doing this I call them newbie nights, and I'll give you the really, really short version of it, but doing a newbie night here at the theater, and we had people I took through the building and everything, and we were going back and listening to some recordings. I always like to take people through, especially when they've never done anything like this before, and we listened to the recorders right then. And three friends of mine, they were psychic mediums, my wife decided to wander through the building, and they came across all kinds of, they were picking up on like John Wayne, the Duke, from the old, the old westerns and everything, digging, clowns, a jail cell. I mean, they're picking up on all kinds of stuff. So they sat down in our theater room at the end of when they were done walking around and trying to put it all together. And they're like, John Wayne Gacy's standing right behind you, Norma, my wife. And she's like, okay. She's like, I have no idea why he's here. And she's like, well, when I was in college, my roommate's brother was killed by John Wayne Gacy.
Whoa.
One of the victims. And there's two other gentlemen in the room with them. And they said, well, we actually handled all the paperwork when he went to prison. And then my wife said, well, you remember that armoire upstairs that you talked about that just had some bad vibes on it? And the one psychic said, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like, that was owned by the attorney that represented Gacy. And when I found out later that he had painted 3 paintings for her, and she used to keep them stored in that armoire. And that armoire actually is locked. When I bought it, it was unlocked. I brought it home. I refinished it. We took it upstairs, put it in our living room upstairs. And when I got it upstairs, it locked, and I can't get it unlocked. And I've tried everything I could figure to get it unlocked, and it won't unlock. A couple years later, I had another psychic came over, and he knew nothing about the story about the Gacy situation, but he'd seen him top the stairs, so we ended up walking through the building, and he told me that he felt, and I didn't tell him anything about the armoire, but he felt that armoire was where he was at, and he said he's protecting paintings. I'm like, okay. There's paintings that she used to store in there. He's like, yeah, he said they're there. I'm like, no, they're not there. I bought it. When I bought it, it was open. I cleaned the inside of it. I know it's there. But he said he still thinks they're there, so that's what he's doing. So.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, we've had a lot of weird experiences with John Wayne Gacy throughout, over some time frames with that.
I probably should know better, but where was John Wayne Gacy committing his crimes? Is it close to where you are?
3 hours north.
Oh, okay.
And then he actually lived in Springfield, which is 20 minutes from me. Mm-hmm. And he lived, and what's really kind of weird is that, just the coincidental situations of this whole thing, which is weird. When he lived in Springfield, he lived on Normandy Road. My wife's first name is Norma. Her dad's name is Norman. And there's probably 2,000 streets in Springfield, and that's the one he lived on.
Wow. It's amazing stuff. So the website is ashmoreestates.net. Anything coming up you want to let people know about?
In April of this year, we do have a suicide awareness prevention that we're doing. Basically, we're donating all the money to help the awareness program for suicide. We've got Dustin Perry coming in, and then quite a few other people that are going to be there as well. And we're just raising money for that. We do some public events each month. We limit, I don't really do this for the money side of things. If I break even at the end of the year, I'm happy with that. But so we've got 12 spots that we rent the place out. We have for the public investigations, we've got 12 spots that we do each month, and that's it. We won't add to it. And and then we do quite a few different fundraisers throughout the year, all to help Lost Limbs Foundation. But we've got kind of a smaller thing going on this year. We don't have quite as many events as we normally do out there, but we do have some other people bringing some events in that'll do some stuff out there.
Just one more question before I let you go. The facility obviously has been featured in some TV stuff. What was something that you actually look back on and maybe put at the top of the list as far as being happy with?
Probably the one, it's been on a couple different TV shows, like you said, the major networks with Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters. Ghost Adventures said they had demonic stuff. I don't believe that a second. Ghost Hunters found nothing, and which I don't believe that for a second either. So I think probably the one that stuck out with me the most, and it wasn't actually on national TV, but Brad Kling came out and did Strange Curiosity, Some Call It Home. He did a whole episode out there on Amazon Prime, and it's really cool because he caught some amazing evidence in the boiler room with some cold spells that came through. It went from dropped 26 degrees down there in the boiler room when he was down there. Wow. Doing some stuff. He also felt the little girl as he was walking down the hallway, which other people have felt, and you could tell just if anybody that knows Brad knows he's the type A male figure, and he's breaking up and almost in tears as he's coming down this hallway. So that was probably my favorite thing that's been done out there as far as any type of television or video stuff.
Is that something that people can see now?
Yep. Excuse me. I think it's still on Amazon Prime under Strange Curiosities. Some Call It Home, and actually, not to back up, but also on the same Strange Curiosity, you can watch the Killer Coincidence, which is what he did. He came up and did one here at the theater when I told him the story about that. So he came up here and did something with the theater with the Gacy situation.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great. Robbin, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate you telling us the story of Ashmore Estates, sharing all that information with us, and we hope to have you back on again sometime.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.